Um, it's a little difficult to get my legs in the shot. I could try. Is this what all the girls do these days? Chapter 15. Ah, yes. Perfect. Are you sure this is 15? Yes, it is. I'm sure, actually. Anonymous, thank you for $10. Gee, Laurie, thanks for nothing. Yeah, with that attitude, you're gonna get banned, you dick. 15. Just kidding. We're gonna do a summary first. So this is Nothing by Jan Teller. I'll reread the first chapter, actually. Chapter 1. Nothing matters. I have known that for a long time. So nothing is worth doing. I just realized that. Nothing matters. From the moment you are born, you start to die. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. You'll live to be a maximum of 100. Life isn't worth the bother. So says Pierre Anton. When he decides that there is no meaning to life, leaves the classroom, climbs a plum tree, and stays there. His friends and classmates cannot get him to come down, not even by pelting him with rocks. He's also throwing plums at them, which I see the summary glosses over that. Anyways, he stays up in a plum tree and he yells at them all day. He's like, why are you going to school? You're gonna die one day anyways. Nothing matters. Why are you doing anything? You better just get used to doing nothing. You're never gonna be anybody. And then he throws a plum at them. But not because he wants to hit them. He just happens to be throwing the plums, and some of them just happen to hit them. So, to prove to him that there is a meaning to life, they set out to build a heap of meaning in an abandoned sawmill. And they say, all right, everybody bring what is most valuable to you, and we're going to get it all together in a big pile, and we're going to show it to Pierre Anton so he'll shut his mouth and come down from the plum tree and go back to school. Because he's a dick. But obviously he's right. He's on to something. We got to prove it. We got to prove it. Anyways. But it soon becomes obvious that each person cannot give up what is most meaningful. So they begin to decide for one another what the others must give up. The pile is started with a lifetime's collection of Dungeons and Dragons books, a fishing rod, a pair of green sandals, a pet hamster. But then, as each demand becomes more extreme, things start taking a very morbid twist, and the kids become ever more desperate to get Pierre Anton down. So where were we? Last week, some of the more morbid things that have begun to happen would be, I think it really kicked off when Elise had to bring her baby brother, her dead baby brother, to the pile. So they went to the graveyard in the middle of the night and they dug up the coffin of her dead 2-year-old brother and brought it to the pile. And a dog that lives at the graveyard because its owner died followed them back to the sawmill and stayed with the coffin, possibly because it thought that maybe its owner was in it. The dog's name is Cinderella. So then I can't remember, okay, who went after that? That eventually led to a guy who had to give up his new bike. He asked for a girl's innocence, and they did that. That was last week as well. And then Jesus on the cross. I believe that was next. Was maybe Sophie is the one whose innocence is on the pile now, on a bloody handkerchief. So Sophie chose Holy Carl, and Holy Carl had to deliver Jesus on the cross. Holy Carl's parents are very big in the church, priest or parish or something. So they broke into the church, which I think is the same church as the graveyard, and they stole Jesus on the rosewood cross, which is usually hanging in a church about Jesus. They'll have him hanging up on a big cross somewhere probably. So they stole Jesus and broke his legs on accident, like he owed them money. Fucking kneecapped him. And they lugged big old Jesus down to the pile. With some broken legs. And Cinderella did not like Jesus. Did not like Jesus at all. Would not let him near the pile. She hates Jesus. And they took the dog out for a walk and brought Jesus, put him on the pile, and then brought the dog back, and she promptly walked up to Jesus and then peed on him. And everybody except Holy Carl laughed, and they realized that they could truly not turn back at this point. They said they were going to borrow Jesus, and they'll return it as soon as they're done proving Pierre Anton wrong. But now they realize they can't really return a Jesus with broken legs and dog pee on him, and things are getting crazy. Chapter 15. We weren't expecting much of Holy Carl. Oh God, I need to start over. We weren't expecting much of Holy Carl. Hey, Spicy. We weren't expecting much of Holy Carl, but this time he surprised us. He wanted Cinderella's head. Weird. Especially because Cinderella didn't belong to anyone. To be sure, the dog meant most to Elise, but Elise had already given up her baby brother's coffin. Otherwise, only Pretty Rosa and Jan Johann were left. And why should giving up Cinderella's head mean more to either of them than to the rest of us? Holy Carl insisted. "Oh, come on, Carl," said Otto. "Cinderella's head," Holy Carl demanded. "Get serious, Carl," said Elise. "Cinderella's head," Holy Carl demanded. "Quit fooling around, Carl," said Macon. "Cinderella's head," Holy Carl demanded, and continued demanding, regardless of what the rest of us were saying. Truth be told, we knew why. Ever since Jesus had been dragged onto the heap of meaning 5 days ago now, Cinderella had been using the rosewood cross as her personal toilet, both for one thing and another. Jesus on the rosewood cross had already lost a good deal of his sacredness, with the broken legs and all. And now, with the dogged efforts of Cinderella, there surely wasn't much hope left for Jesus. But still, in the end, we told Holy Carl that he had to choose something that mattered especially to Pretty Rosa or Jan Johann. "Okay," he said. "Then Pretty Rosa is going to cut Cinderella's throat." He'd got us. Pretty Rosa couldn't bear the sight of blood. So separating Cinderella from her head was going to mean a great deal more for her, especially. This time there were two who cried. Pretty Rosa cried and begged for mercy and said she couldn't and that she'd just pass out in the middle of all of it and maybe have an epileptic fit and have to be taken to the hospital and never be normal again. Elise cried like she'd never cried over her baby brother's coffin. We didn't pay either of them any heed. The first thing was for Pretty Rosa to pull herself together. Cinderella's head was a considerably smaller sacrifice than the ones many of the rest of us had been forced to make. The second thing was that we'd all suspected Elise had gotten off too lightly and had actually been happy about her brother's coffin being dug up. Holy Carl had found 2 sacrifices with 1 prayer. Honestly, I forgot about this, Moose. So I didn't even know. I was like, haha, yeah, it's a little ominous, isn't it? But I guess that's the dog rule. If there's a dog in a story, that's gonna get shot by a gun. Holy Carl had found 2 sacrifices with 1 prayer. Jan Johann's father was a butcher and had a shop out front of the house where they lived. One early morning, after a couple of aborted attempts, Jan Johann succeeded in sneaking away a long, newly sharpened carving knife, which he took with him out to the sawmill and thrust into a wooden post, where it remained, glinting and waiting for Pretty Rosa to pull herself together. Which turned out to be sooner rather than later. When we got to the sawmill on a cold and stormy afternoon, in the late fall. Cinderella was no more. Her head lay gaping resentfully at us on the top of the heap, while her carcass lay draped across little Emil's coffin. That was now more red than crackled white. White, pink, red is dead. Pretty Rosa had looked oddly unmoved all day at school. Later, she kept claiming she'd almost fainted and that it had been worse than horrifying, and that she'd turned off the lights in the sawmill so as to not see the blood. The thing about the lights had doubtless been for the better, because seeing the coffin now with all the blood and Cinderella's head without its body, Pretty Rosa passed out without a hint of warning. Huge Hans and Otto carried her over to the other end of the sawmill and piled up some boards to block the sight of both she passed out after seeing Cinderella's head without its body. Huge Hans and Otto carried her over to the other end of the sawmill and piled up some boards to block the sight of both the coffin and Cinderella. Taking her outside was out of the question, in case anyone happened by. Jan Johann examined the knife, which had been stuck back into the post, now all begrimed with dried blood. "Who would have thought Pretty Rosa had a butcher inside her?" he exclaimed, and laughed loudly. Maybe he wouldn't have laughed so much had he known what more Pretty Rosa could bring to pass. There was something devious about it. Not the matter of Pretty Rosa being able to cut Cinderella's throat without flinching, and then pass out at the mere sight of blood on the coffin, even if that was pretty odd in itself. No, the deviousness became apparent when Pretty Rosa demanded the index finger of Jan Johann's right hand. It was a Tuesday afternoon, shortly after we'd all arrived at the sawmill. Drenched to the bone by an incessant pouring rain that also found its way through the holes in the sawmill roof and made pools in the sawdust that we still weren't too old. That we still weren't too old to paddle in. Ursula Marie said that was something that couldn't be asked for, especially not when it was Jan Johann who played guitar and sang Beatles songs so that it almost sounded like them. And he wouldn't be able to anymore without his finger, and so Pretty Rosa couldn't ask for it. "Yes, I can," said Pretty Rosa, without explaining why. "No, you can't," said Ursula Marie, and the rest of us backed her up. A line had to be drawn somewhere. "Yes, I can." said Pretty Rosa. No, you can't, we all said again. And then, when it had all gone on long enough, and it was like there was no more strength left in Pretty Rosa, and our refusal was met by a weary silence that made us think we'd won. At least until Sophie chipped in. What? Like Jan Johann's finger doesn't matter? On that point, we obviously couldn't disagree with her. But a finger was still something you couldn't just ask someone to hand over. But Sophie persisted and couldn't see why there should be any discussion. Everyone else has gotten what they wanted, and if Pretty Rosa wants Jan Johann's finger, then she should have Jan Johann's finger. Eventually we agreed, since no one was going to be able to bring themselves to cut off Jan Johann's finger anyway. I will, said Sophie, matter-of-factly. I did a really good job with the summary beforehand. You guys should know who all of these people are. Actually, it's Girl Boss Sophie. Thank you. We stared at her, mute. Every one of us. Something cold had come over Sophie. Ever since the thing about the innocents. Cold, colder. Frost, ice, and snow. All of a sudden I remembered that Jan Johann had been there that evening at the sawmill. And I didn't want to start imagining what he had used that finger to do. But now I knew who had separated poor Cinderella's head from her body. Sophie was a sly one. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. Firstly, because I wasn't sure the finger didn't match up rather well with what Sophie had been made to deliver. And secondly, because I wasn't comfortable anymore with the thought of what else Sophie might be capable of. I wasn't alone in feeling relieved that the heap of meaning was almost done. Jan Johann couldn't care less. For all he cared, it could have been the beginning or the end. Jan Johann couldn't care less. For all he cared, it could have been the beginning or the end of the heap. There was no way he was going to give up his index finger. If Jan Johann hadn't been the last of us, we might have let him off. For who could know what might be next? Or perhaps that isn't quite true. The truth is more likely that if Jan Johann hadn't been the class leader who decided everything and played guitar and sang Beatles songs whenever he felt like it, we would have let him off. As it was, there was no way out. It would happen Saturday afternoon. First, Sophie would cut the finger off. Then we'd quickly apply a makeshift bandage, and then Holy Carl would run Jan Johann home to Jan Johann's parents in his trailer so they could get him to the emergency room, where he could be bandaged up properly. On Sunday, we were going to fetch Pierre Anton.